very typically I have the closing slot after most of the points have been made, and very well made, and a few of you look like you're wilting and probably itching to get in on the discussion as well. So I will try to be as brief as I can. I think that many people here would agree upon where we need to go for all of the reasons that the others have already outlined so very well. We need free, safe, legal abortion in Ireland as part of our health service for any woman who needs it for whatever reason, as part of an overall struggle for full reproductive rights, which I have to say does include as well the right to have children, the right to bring them up with dignity, with support, without poverty, and so on. And it is somewhat ironic that we have been subjected over the past number of weeks to backbencher after backbencher from Fine Gael, people who no one has ever heard of, who've stood over the most vicious austerity imposed particularly on children in this state, particularly on children with disabilities, and they didn't give a toss about that. They never opened their mouth, and now suddenly we're to believe that these people are the champions of the unborn. They're not, they're hypocrites, they're out to control people, and they are as disconnected on this issue, to be honest, as they are on most other issues in society. Now, I think the others have dealt very well with how, when you look back, that in some ways everything is different now in so many ways in Irish society, but on the surface or in the legislature everything has remained the same and has failed to keep a pace at the developments on the ground. And we have come a huge way in some ways. It's over 25 years ago when I was in the student union movement, where magazines used to be blacked out because they had abortion information on it. It is 21 years, there's people less than 21 years here who never experienced the movements around the X case, that tragic internment of a young rape victim to stop her going for that medical treatment. But it was the social movements around the X case which led to the Supreme Court interpreting our Constitution to say that we had a lawful right to an abortion in Ireland where a woman's life was in danger, including a risk from suicide. And it's interesting to note that the court also said that that threat didn't have to be immediate or inevitable, which is something that the government has not in any way taken into account in the latest bill, which is supposed to be legislating for X. And what we've had really is years of inaction and political cowardice throughout the past number of decades, on the one hand, while on the other, society has moved forward massively. And the bill that we moved in April 2012, myself and a number of other colleagues, was the first piece of, if you like, proactive legislation for abortion in Ireland that wasn't just reacting to a tragedy, that we actually put on the table, if you like, the need for abortion in the X case circumstances. Now, we were absolutely unapologetic. We would have liked it to be much broader than that, but the Constitution only allowed us to go that far. And we were expecting a backlash at that time. I remember the meeting organised by the lads here in Action Annex and that we had in the Gresham. It was the first public meeting that had been held in a long time. A number of us were speculating, was there going to be a backlash? Would there be protests from the anti-abortion lobby at it? We were wondering, would we get our houses picketed and so on? None of those things happened. What actually happened was a very rational debate took place for the first time in some ways in society and in the Dáil. You had coincidentally at that time the women who had very recently had abortions where their fetus had a fatal abnormality come forward on television and in the media, identify themselves and their families, which was a first in Ireland, that people openly put a name to their experiences as women who'd had abortions. And it did alter the whole basis of the discussion. We should remember that it's less than 12 months ago when we had the very vocal, very confident pro-choice march last summer, which was met with very welcoming scenes from all of the passers-by on the streets of Dublin. So it's actually not true to say that the Savita Halappanavar tragedy, which touched so many people in this country, was a motive force for the present situation. In actual fact, what the outpouring around that tragedy revealed, and we should register that more people took to the streets around that tragedy demanding something would be done than they did on the vicious austerity that's been imposed on their backs in the past year as well. So it was a huge issue, but what that did actually was force people to wake up. It didn't necessarily change the attitudes. The attitudes had already changed But it's said to the people sitting at home, it's not enough to sit at home. It's not enough to allow the politicians to continue to ignore this problem. And they are going to do that as long as people sit idly by. And I think that was the lesson that was learned, and that was the jolt that woke people up, because this woman died as a result needlessly from political cowardice, and that was an absolutely appalling travesty. So I think that's an important point to make. I think people felt that they were sick of the hypocrisy, of the pretense that there is no Irish abortion, when everybody knows Irish abortion is pretty much the same rate as it is in any other country. We just say that absolutely you have a constitutional right to abortion in Ireland, if you're in our constitution, because the constitution says you have a right to travel to get one, you have a right to information about it. We just don't want to see you, we don't want to hear you, we want to export you out of this country, and we pretend that you don't exist in the ways in which we used to do when we locked you up behind the walls of a Magdalen laundry if you were a lone parent, or we put you through procedures of symphysiotomy. And the problem with that now, of course, is that against the backdrop of a recession, with people having less access to travel and use that safety valve, and non-national women not being able to make that journey, is that in actual fact the continuing political cowardice means that more lives are going to be sadly at risk. Now, as Alva and the others said, the majority of Irish people support abortion when you get down to it, for all sorts of different reasons, if they wouldn't maybe at this stage acknowledge that they're openly pro-choice. I think we can say as a fact that the church, despite their 10 leaflets and despite their crusading, which has been in top gear now for the past number of months, actually have very little influence. The anti-abortion lobby are hugely financed. They punch way above their weight though. Let's be clear, they have an unwarranted access to the media, to the political establishment and to money. But what they don't have is victory in the hearts and minds of ordinary people, because every single family in Ireland has had somebody who's had an abortion. They may not realise it, but such is the facts of life as they have been. And the problem with progress has been the weak-kneed political establishment, who are as out of touch on this issue, to be honest, as they are on everything else. And I suppose one of the important points to discuss is that progress really can only be made when ordinary people organise, because social change and all of the changes that were referred to previously weren't granted by the establishment. They were fought for by activists who went in previous generations for divorce, for contraception and so on. And the legislation that we have now, I won't dwell on it too much, Ross has dealt with it, it's symbolically hugely important, but the tragedy is that very few women will avail of any benefit from it. The number of medical practitioners, the appalling vista that they're still criminalising women and their doctors, a 14-year jail sentence still being provided for, the spectacle that a rape victim who presents as suicidal and has an abortion could be imprisoned, while the perpetrator of that rape, 9 times out of 10 would never even get 14 years for his crime. There are huge issues about the fact that they haven't legislated for fatal fetal abnormalities, which legal opinion says could be accommodated even within the remit of the Constitution, because the Constitution equates the right to life of the woman with the right to life of the fetus. But if there is no life to protect, if that fetus isn't going to be viable, then it doesn't really benefit from the protection of the Constitution. And we've had the Minister for Justice stand up and describe people being forced to carry to full term a pregnancy like that as indescribable cruelty. He has admitted that our Constitution means that in Ireland women have a qualified right to health, that not all citizens are indeed equal. And the Irish Council for Civil Liberties has said that our failure to address this issue in the context of the European Court of Human Rights is actually exposing people and women to inhuman and degrading treatment. We have a crazy scenario where medical practitioners have to nearly wait and say now, yeah, the health is bad there, but is this woman at death's door yet? Can we really intervene at this stage? And that will continue even after the passage of this bill. So what we need to do is we do need to use the next couple of weeks to try and get some of the worst bits of that bill out and make it a bit better than what it will be. But the real battle And the only way of sorting this out and dealing with all of the reasons why women need to access abortion is to get the 8th Amendment out of the Constitution. There is no other way, so that we can regulate and legislate for this as other countries do. And I think that's the backdrop really in which this discussion needs to take place. Everything is different in many ways. It's the politicians who are behind the scenes, and it's a little bit like a game of snakes and ladders where you're moving up in ones and twos as the dice goes. You get knocked back, a snake eats you, you go back down the board. We're at the stage on the board now, in my opinion, in terms of the hearts and minds of people, where all the snakes are behind us. There's only ladders left, but we have to keep moving forward a bit so that we can take the leap forward that's necessary, because I have no doubt that the young women and men who are in this room now are not going to wait the 21 years that we've waited since the X case. It's just not possible in the present context and the way in which attitudes have moved on. So that's the energy that we have to harness. And I just want to finish with 2 quotes from 2 people who got in contact with me when we first moved the bill first time round. And the first one, just to challenge your atheism, and I'm a proud atheist myself, is actually from the Bishop of Cashel and Ossory, a Church of Ireland bishop, who sent me a letter saying that I might be surprised to get it, which I was very surprised to get it, but thanking me for moving the bill the first time round, talking about the systemic spinelessness of previous governments in not addressing this matter. He said, "You've done something to restore my confidence in Parliament and to encourage the nation to get real about this painful matter. You are so right about the pretense and the hypocrisy that surround it." And you see, I believe that Irish people, and most Irish people, have seen through the cowardice and the hypocrisy. And one of the better letters I got was from a girl who said she went to school with me. And her letter was, she says, "You know, I'm sick listening to this argument that abortion is never medically necessary. This just doesn't wash, because contraception isn't medically necessary. It's there to allow people to regulate reproduction and plan their families and be responsible citizens. The lack of free family planning services and access to free affordable contraception, separation of the sexes in schools, and the lack of separation of church and state actually encourages the situations that lead to unwanted pregnancies in the first place. I just really wish that the Irish government would stop hiding behind the smokescreen of religion in order to not have to pay for free non-denominational education and free family planning. I believe in human rights, children's rights, women's rights, and that's why I believe in ethical conduct, which puts human welfare above monetary gain, gives people access to information and services so that they can make informed decisions and exercise their human right to self-determination.